Well, good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to the 2015 annual UCL School of Pharmacy lecture. I can see many familiar faces in the audience, and I know this is always an occasion that we all relish in terms of the debate of the moment. And as you'll hear in a moment, I don't think we could be more topical than we have today in our lecturer and our lecture. As you can imagine, at UCL, we're still basking in the results of our REF results and that wonderful word, that wonderful expression, research power, which we all now have come to love at UCL. And I'm also delighted that we continue to have the support and sponsorship of Pfizer for our lecture, which I think is now something like the 6th or 7th. I've begun to lose count. It's probably a sign of age. But it's clearly something which has now become something of a New Year's institution, thanks to Professor David Taylor and his colleagues at the School of Pharmacy, and thanks to Professor Duncan Craig as well for continuing the tradition under his directorship of the school. As I said, given the debate this week in particular about the Cancer Drug Fund and about cancer treatments, this subject really couldn't be more topical, and we couldn't have a better informed lecturer on the subject. Many of you know Rob, very familiar in the world of pharmacy. He's the Chief Executive of Pharmacy Voice. He's an honorary professor at the School of Pharmacy at the University of Nottingham, from where he graduated with a B.Pharm in 1981. Rob started his career in the NHS and has since worked in the Department of Health at Alliance Unichem and for the Pharmacy Professional Regulator. He joined the Company Chemist Association as its chief executive in 2007 and has led the joint representation body Pharmacy Voice since December 2010. Now, Rob was co-chair of the Modernising Pharmacy Careers Programme Board's review of the professional training of pharmacists, and in 2012 he was asked by Earl Howe to co-chair the steering group on improving the use of medicines. He's a registered pharmacist and is tonight talking independently of his organisational associations, I should add. So, Rob, over to you.
Tim, thank you very much for that fantastic introduction. I kind of recognise myself in there, and the bit that scared me the most was thinking about how many people are here. So friends, colleagues and distinguished guests, I hope I give you something to go home with this evening. It's a great honour to be asked to give the UCL lecture, a particular honour since UCL, or the School of Pharmacy, is the alma mater of my wife. And I've been to a number of these lectures in the past, and I know how they have become a part of the calendar. And it's a real honour for me to be here and to address you and to follow some very, very distinguished friends and colleagues who have given this lecture in the past. Tim has done the bit about me giving a personal view. I guess my reflection on coming here tonight is you only get one stab at this kind of things, so I might as well, as they say, go for it. So I'm going to do that tonight. I'm going to do some challenges. I'm going to review where I think we are, and I'm also going to look forward a little bit and maybe also suggest what we might do next, which I think would be quite exciting and might actually deliver something. So I'm going to talk about care, compassion and community pharmacy, and I should just start by explaining this rather weird title. David, to whom I also give my profuse thanks for inviting me to do this, has dug out for you all the picture, A Dance to the Music of Time, painted by the French painter Nicolas Poussin in 1620. And the painting is generally regarded as demonstrating the passing of time and the different stages of life on a revolving wheel of fortune. A Dance to the Music of Time is also the title of a novel series by the British author Anthony Powell, which is one of my favourite sets of books. And it's called A Dance to the Music of Time because the protagonists and the antagonists meet up with each other. They spend some time with each other. They might work with each other. They then lose touch with each other. They then come back together. Their lives entwine over a period of time. And my link really to care and compassion is, I think, in the 170 odd years of the history of the profession of pharmacy, we've been quite close to patients and the public at certain times. We've drifted a little bit away from patients and the public, I would say, with a heavy focus on the products, the medicines, the science. And at the moment, this period of time in our history, and with some of the challenges facing the NHS, I think we have to reconnect with patients and the public. It's about time. And I'm going to talk you through my thoughts on where care and compassion fits in all of that. Truly challenging times for healthcare. The NHS may be world class as adjudged by the OECD, but you only have to open a newspaper to see whether it's A&E, whether it's general practice workloads, whether it's cost pressures, or whether it's the staff crisis. The NHS is facing some significant challenges. And my take on the structural reforms, I'm only going to mention them once, is that we wasted 3 years with a lot of pain and heartache. We stood still for quite a long time while everybody worked out whether they had a job or not, whether the balls were going to fall down in the same place. We had to then rebuild the connections, and we could have been developing primary care, which has slipped behind everything else. And whether you're talking about my primary care profession or others or general practice, we've slipped behind. And we could have spent 3 years doing something about that, and we might not be in quite the state we're in now. But my start point, I guess, is the wake-up call that was the Francis report. And if anybody is deluding themselves that the lessons of the Francis inquiry into mid-staffs was about some hospital somewhere north of here, and not too far from where I come from, if you can tell from the accent, which I desperately tried to get rid of, but it's still there. If anybody thinks it doesn't apply to them, well, I think this sentence, in particular for my colleagues in community pharmacy, it's from the government's response to the Francis inquiry. It's in the first bit, it's in, I think, paragraph 5. Whether in a care home, at the family doctor, in a community pharmacy, in mental health services, etc., we'll ensure that the fundamental standards of care that people have a right to expect are met consistently, whatever the setting. And I suppose this wake-up call chimes for me with a number of times over recent years when I've been involved in some things, and Tim gave you a bit of a flavour of one or two of them, where I've sat in rooms talking to colleagues about with a professionalism, and where the professional principles of the altruistic application of specialist knowledge in the client's interest first and foremost might be, and where it might need to be in the future. Whether it was as part of the discussions that Anthony Smith and I led with a great group of people thinking about the pharmacy undergraduate and pre-registration programme, or now in the middle of the discussions with the rebalancing board thinking about how legislation and professional regulation might be adjusted to make more sense for the world we're living in today. So this chimes directly into those kind of conversations which were all going on about where professionalism fits in the modern world. You also can't talk about where we are now without also reflecting on the vision of NHS England's national leadership in the 5-year forward view published in October 2014. Permissive, not prescriptive, and in amongst all of it, and there are many of my colleagues who the first thing they do when they get a new document is count how many times the word pharmacist is mentioned. I can see a few nods in the audience. The answer here was 4. far more than a lot of other primary care professions. But in amongst all of that, for me, a twin-track ambition for pharmacy. We're in amongst the right care at the right time in the right place. Making more appropriate use of primary care, sure. And then right at the bottom there, the 5-year forward view saying a far greater use of pharmacists. So that's all looking very positive. But some challenges in amongst the 5-year forward view too. The localism agenda, a challenge for community pharmacy. You know, we've got some big organisations that operate on a national, indeed a multinational basis. And that's a bit of a challenge, thinking about local. And also the ways of working, the ways we've worked ever since the NHS was created in 1948 with a national contractual framework. And the rise of local commissioners, lots of different sorts of local commissioners, really is making my colleagues leading the profession at a local level work harder and harder and harder to keep up. So the 5-year forward view also looking positive. And it's not as if we don't know some of the answers. In thinking about this tonight, I was reflecting on some of the presentations that I'd heard here. And on this very stage, we've had people give us some of the answers. So 6 years ago, Rob Horne presented this slide, probably not quite in this font. And I'm not even sure whether Rob would know which font it was actually in. But Rob was really focusing on how medicines experts might adopt a more person-centred approach by understanding that people believe different things about their condition, about their medicines, whether the medicines will work for them or not, and indeed what medicines are like more generally. And suggested to us that as a profession we needed to think a little bit more about that. We needed to apply our minds to what patients feel and what the public feel about their condition and their medicines might impact on their intention to use the medicine or not. And as you memorably said, people take medicines either because they can't or because they don't want to. So moving on, 4 years ago, I'm going to have to explain this, Nick will recognise it. Nick Barber stood here and as well as telling us, giving us a fascinating ride through how pharmacy as a profession grew in the Victorian era, as the trusted profession, keeping people safe, interpreting, producing products for the public. He had this slide, which is actually about how along the patient journey, post-diagnosis, through prescribing, getting a prescription, having it dispensed, taking it and then getting a clinical outcome, there are all kinds of drop-off points, and that the system rapidly impacts on the overall effectiveness when any of those things go wrong. And the big drops there are, people don't necessarily take the medicines they're prescribed. 50% of people in long-term conditions don't. And also, the medicine itself might not work. So those are those two big drops at the end. So a rapidly decaying graph. So we need to address that, don't we? And all of those two things and many other things translate into these widely quoted numbers, which I don't really need to go through because everybody in this audience has probably already seen them. But it's about the numbers of people who get a new medicine, take it as intended. About how people very rapidly stop taking the medicine as intended, even if they started well, because they might have some issues. It's about how we need to address the care of our people in long-term care. It's also about errors elsewhere in the system that pharmacists day in, day out identify. And it's about waste. And it's also about how if you get some of those things wrong, people end up going in and out of very expensive secondary care provision. So there's lots of things there to address and some ways people have thought about to do that. And I hope that tonight isn't another of those occasions. 6 years, 4 years, the new medicine service research took almost 10 years to get into practice. So here's a little cartoon, the Dilbert, that I quite like, about turning up to stuff, getting energised, thinking about it, and you go home and it goes on a shelf. And I was talking to Keith Ridge the other day about something that we've got coming up planned for Q1 this year, and Keith said to me, Rob, that's not going to be another report, is it? And I said, well, yeah, it will be another report, but we have an idea about what we're going to do with it immediately afterwards. Because what's important is that you do something with some of the things that come out of there. So the answers are there to be used. Can we turn them into something that is both coherent and sustainable? Now, I can't solve everything tonight. I've only got 40 minutes, although I might have a crack at it, but I'm not going to. And I'm certainly not going to touch on a lot of things that flow from trying to effect change. And I'm not pretending that in a system that's been as it is basically for nigh on 70 years, that there's a quick fix involved in some of that, around some of the intractable issues, particularly funding. But I'm going to frame the challenges in the context of care and compassion and what that means to me. And at the end, I'm actually going to offer, since I'm going to go for it, I'm going to offer a way forward that I think it will be really helpful, and I get quite excited, which is always good, to get involved in and to think through a little bit further, and to see if we can't put something together for my sector, community pharmacy, to address some of these challenges a little bit better than we might have in the past. Now, we're not in isolation. The direction of travel across the world is very, very similar. We're moving from treating sick patients to helping people stay healthy. We're moving from, or we're thinking about moving, we're trying to move very hard from institutionalised care, where people are taken away from their families and their friends, to community-supported models, where people stay and live well, longer, older, with their social support networks, with their family, and with their friends. We're trying to do all of those things. And in helping to do this, we've got some big advantages in the community sector. 12,000, a network of almost 12,000 outlets in England alone. Outlets where people live, outlets where people work, outlets close to where people shop, on the high street. There are such things as under-doctored areas. We hear talk about them. Under-doctored does not mean an absence of primary care. Community pharmacies are there, and they're there to be used. But I guess the central tenet of my talk tonight is a lot of the new things, a lot of the exciting things that we've taken pharmacies into in the community sector are still, for me, a little bit ad hoc. They're a little bit voluntary. They aren't really, truly embedded in where we are. So even with evidence to the contrary, that around the world there is little to compare the service we're currently doing at lower cost, like everything else, we've got to do better. If the NHS generally, we've got to make our contribution, and particularly if community pharmacy is to survive. And we've not just got to do things better, we've also got to do better things. So I'm going to start by saying what we do need to do is we need a little bit more honesty about some of the things that happen. So first, the supply of medicines on its own is not necessarily care. And I think people are thinking about lots of different ways in which you could supply medicines. And I'm going to say in a minute that, of course, that's not just what you get. But I think there is also a little bit of an undercurrent that we've done what we've always done. We supply some medicines on time, and that's fine. Well, I'm not sure it is fine anymore, and we need to be honest about that. So, in amongst all of that, there is something else that goes with the supply of the medicines, and here's just some very top-line information from an audit we did in 2012. 20 million items dispensed, 2.2 incidents per 1,000 items dispensed, taken up by the pharmacist. That's active rather than sorting out one or two little minor things in and around this, but they're quite significant. Tot all that up, this is data from 4,409 pharmacies. It's not half a dozen pharmacies in a particular locality. This is quite a lot of them. Measuring this over a couple of weeks, intervening in 1.89 million prescribing items incidents per year. and making a contribution. The figure that isn't on the slide is that we also checked these incidents, and I think we could probably have done it a little bit better. We probably need to have another look at how we did it. But we asked people to think about the consequences of what would happen had they not done something. And we were, I think, fairly confident enough to say that 43,800 items on that basis, incidents of potentially serious harm or worse, prevented annually on an annualised basis by community pharmacists day in, day out. Now, we didn't ask anybody to do anything different here. This is nothing different. This is just what they do. What we did ask them to do, which is a little bit unusual, we asked them to record it. And, you know, the importance of measurement is you know, year on year is vitally important. We didn't think anybody had ever done this before. And when you start to put these kind of numbers together, people really want to talk to you. I mean, that's a big lesson for me. So we need to refresh this. We need to have another look at it. We need to check that we did it right. But some interesting stuff here. You don't just get supply, you get a safe service. But we need to be honest about then what comes next. Second, if we know things like the new medicine service works, and the recent evaluation makes clear that it does, then the big question for me is, that's great, but how do we get consistent delivery and at scale? Because we're still only just over half of all my community pharmacy colleagues delivering the new medicine service now, and we're into kind of year 3 of that delivery. So why are only half of them doing it? And, you know, what is the barrier to making that happen? Because if, more importantly, it represents better care and more compassionate care because it delivers outcomes, then surely we have to embed that in the system. If the circumstances arise in which these services should be delivered because we know it works, then what's the corollary of that? Where's the care being delivered if it's not delivered? And if something works and it delivers outcomes, then I would say to you that voluntary, albeit incentivised, really isn't good enough. Because to me, part of being a compassionate professional is that you offer services when you can that are of proven value. And I suppose I was reflecting in thinking about this on some of the discussions that I've seen starting up in and around the profession about the use of the summary care record. And what's my liability position if I have access to additional information about my patient or the person in front of me, and I might access it but I don't access it, and am I going to be more liable for what then happens as a consequence? And I suppose I can read that across to the same thing. What if I know, because it's been shown and proven, that these services deliver benefit to the public, and also, I guess ultimately as well, we're interested in the public purse, then what does that say about me if I don't offer that service? And what might be, it's worth thinking about, isn't it? Now, across all of these areas, across lots of areas, cancer, CVD, asthma, COPD, pain relief, even eye care, there's more we can do. I've already bumped into 2 colleagues from optometry tonight. I'm delighted that they're here. But I was at the National Optical Conference, I think, in November, and was chatting to somebody who told me that their evidence is that fewer, if we were to ask optometrists how many of their patients can actually use eye drops properly, we may well be talking about single digits in a percentage terms. Eye drops. We're not talking about massive technology here. We're talking about a dropper bottle, been around for ages. That also makes you think. So across all of these areas, our medicine's being used to optimal effect. And I think all of that comes together in this particular publication from a number of years ago by the School of Pharmacy working with the Health Economics Unit at York. Now, this document contributed the headline figure of the £300 million worth of waste, 150 million avoidable, if we do try and do something about it. But much more interesting for me is Chapter 5. In Chapter 5, there's an economic evaluation of the benefit, in monetary terms, of moving the proportion of patients who use their medicines who are adherent to their medicines at an 80% level. Getting people to 80%. And these numbers add up to staggering sums of money. And this is just 5 therapeutic areas. So is there a lot to go for? Yes, there is. Do we need to save £30 billion? I guess yes, we do. Are we likely to get $8 billion out of the government? Yes, we might. But we can make a contribution by starting to put a dent into some of this. So I've painted a picture. We need to improve adherence. I think it's really important. I'm going to come back to it. Patients believe different things, and yet we treat them all as if they're the same. This is, I think, Rob's point. It's Nick's point. And it's now my point. It's anybody who looks at this' point, I think, that how is it that if people believe different things and do different things with their medicines, and we know about that, why do we treat them all the same? Why do we give them all a 28-day prescription? Whether they use their medicines or not, whether they got needs about their medicines or not, whether they're perfectly capable of looking after themselves for 3 or 6 months. Let's look at it this way. The GP is saying, review 12 months, review 6 months. I don't necessarily need to have any clinical input to this individual for a number of months. That's my clinical judgment. I think pharmacists can make those clinical judgments too. And I'd like us to start thinking about how we put a bit more science into supply. And thirdly, and I think this is my last challenge really, again, if we're being honest, I think we have to fess up to the fact that we haven't got the greatest track record at implementing things. And by implementing things, I'd say properly, at scale, pretty speedily. Now, this is a big issue, I know right now, for the pharmaceutical industry. How do we get innovation into healthcare, into the NHS? To pay back some of that huge spend that's going on in inventing new medicines. Well, the same is true of any technology, and some of these things are also technologies. So we've got a pretty poor track record, I'd say, at implementation. And this is too often kind of where we are. We have a great idea. We think it'll happen because we send somebody a leaflet, or somebody, often like me, stands up and says, what a great idea, go and do it, it'll be brilliant for patients. And yes, it will be, but we don't really think about the bit in the middle. And we don't think, and there's an old adage, and it's true here, if we fail to plan, then essentially we're planning to fail, and we've got to do better. So those are the challenges. Here are the upsides. It doesn't matter really which document you want to pluck out of the air right now that governs what we think about where we need to be, what we need to achieve in healthcare. Here's the NHS Outcomes Framework from 2012-2013. There's the domains. I'm not going to read them, but you can apply pharmacy skills, not just in the community, across the sector, across pharmacy as a profession, to all of these domains in one way or another. Plenty of opportunity. And here's the Public Health Framework. The same is true of this. We can do similarly there. Public Health Outcomes Framework for England 2013-2016. In each of those domains there are things that pharmacists can do. And we've also set about, with the help of some colleagues, some of whom are in the room tonight, resolving some of the challenges, some of the issues that we might face in getting more of these things done. So the document in the top right reflects the fact that we've moved public health services to local government. And we've got a developing and building relationship with the Local Government Association. There's the LGA's word to the troops, the elected members and council officials, introducing them to community pharmacy, local government's new public health role. And I'm delighted to say we're able to help them out a little bit with that. Mike Farrer, who's in the room, led the NHS Confederation's work as part of the Pharmacy and Public Health Forum in producing this document Health on the High Street, recognising that the changed environment for pharmacy was complicated and therefore commissioners might need a little bit of help thinking it through, pharmacy might need a little bit of help thinking through commissioning, and really looking at how we might break down some of those barriers and not lose things in the transition across the organisational changes. People have always been a bit sketchy about the evidence base. So the Chief Knowledge Officer of Public Health England, John Newton, led the work to review collate, put together the evidence base for pharmacy services in public health. And on occasion, people who know a lot more about public health get a little bit sniffy about the standards of services. So the RPS led a great piece of work to produce some standards, professional standards for public health practice for pharmacy, working with the public health community. So we don't need any more of those sniffy conversations about, well, it's all a bit amateurish, isn't it? Well, no, it's not, because we've got some standards for that now, and we ought to be using these things. So we've sorted out some of those things too. And the high-profile bit goes further. Here's a quote from the phase 1 report of the Urgent Emergency Care Review. Community pharmacies are an underutilised resource. You can read it yourself. 100 hours a week, growing, some are open even longer than that. Qualified pharmacists, you know all this kind of stuff. Never in my professional career, over too many years, you were told what year I graduated, have we been in this position? And the 438 million contacts a year in community pharmacy, right up front in the phase 1 review. So, what should we do about it? My prescription. We should start clearly with where people are interested. We should start with urgent and emergency care. And I believe that the 5-year forward view intent is that community pharmacy should be a fundamental part of urgent and emergency care. I like the way the Director of Acute Care, Keith Willett, talks about how we shift things across the system. We just need to take 1, 2, 3% of people out of one box and put them into another, down the system towards the self-care end. If we can keep just a few people out of A&E, we can keep a few people out of the GP surgery, we can all do our bit. We might be doing something to relieve the pressure on the system. And I think we've made a start with this locally, but we also need to deal with some outstanding questions. And for me, those challenges about scale, delivery, what does the care look like that we're trying to achieve, are still to be worked through so that we can do this so people are clear about what we're trying to achieve. I'm going to come back to that at the end, because if there is a big finish to this, that's going to be it. But secondly, whether you're thinking about pharmaceutical care, or you want to call it medicines optimisation, or you want to call it something else, there is a focus right now on adherence. Poor adherence is a wasted investment in medicines. Poor adherence leads to poor outcomes for our people. And poor adherence means that you don't meet the needs the patients want. Not what I want or what the GP wants, but what does the patient want to achieve? What does the member of the public, the individual, the person we're providing services to, what do they want their health service to help them to do? This is not a UK phenomenon. So if you haven't seen it, and I'm grateful to the person who pointed me in the direction of it, who we won't mention right now, but he knows who he is. I'm very interested in the Script Your Future consumer-led campaign in the US. Because what it does is it says to the individual, what do you want to achieve? Because do you know what? We'll help you take your medicines because they could be part of helping you to achieve that. So whether you want to help your grandchild get into college or do their homework, whether you want to, at the end of the day, be able to walk to the shops. I'm not sure that was going to crop up too often in America, walking to the shops. But do you know my point? For people, what they want to achieve may be very, very practical things. And that's what that US campaign is about doing. And a newer one, a kind of a focus really on raising the profile of non-adherence, puts the US challenge of non-adherence at $300 billion. $300 billion. A phenomenal sum. And whether it's the US or whether it's Australia, New Zealand, Canada, bits of Canada, Europe, medicines check programs, or whatever they're called, are happening. People are investing in them. We're looking at them. And in one or two places, they're even sticking a little bit of research alongside it, so we might learn as we go along and make sure that what we're doing is the right thing, that we learn from experience. And we've done some good things over here too around adherence. This is the one that's often quoted. The Inhaler Technique Improvement Programme started on the Isle of Wight in Portsmouth, became the NHS South Central programme before South Central disappeared, and there's just some stats on here. Improvement in asthma control test scores, positive association between the introduction of the project and changes in emergency admissions, maintaining motivation for people to use their inhalers. Quite complicated, particularly the older versions require a level of manual dexterity that needs a bit of practice. People like the service, and it's almost the gift that keeps on giving. When the study was written up, the number of medicines use reviews related to inhaler technique continued to increase after the study itself finished, and that's really what you want, isn't it? A win-win where new things are invented and people continue to do them because it's the right thing to do. And I suspect that a lot of that is to do with the positive feedback, the reinforcement that individuals get from doing the right thing. Now, it may be I'm a long, long time away from frontline practice. The last time I worked in a pharmacy was in 2000, and the last time I did it as a day job was way before that. But I remember what that feels like. I remember what doing the right thing for a person that you're working with feels like, and that's why people do it. And I think that's why when you do it well, you get feedback and it continues. Now, I haven't done the numbers because the numbers aren't available for me to do it, but I'd like to know the value of those MURs. The new medicine service in impact assessment published by the Department of Health is worth about £95 a go. It costs about, to deliver it, the payment for it is about £27, £28. So £95. If it's deal or no deal, you're getting a £95 box for 28 quid. I do watch Deal or No Deal occasionally. But what's this MUR worth? If we're keeping people out of hospital, I don't think it's worth 95 quid. I think it's worth a lot more than that. And if it's worth a lot more, not just to the system, but to the person who's got better control of their respiratory condition, then why are we not focusing on doing it whenever those circumstances arise? What's the next thing? If it's better care, better value, then why aren't we doing more of it? And how do we make that happen? We've done some work around high-risk medicines. Medicines with a narrow therapeutic index. I even vaguely remember what that is. Methotrexate, warfarin, lithium in the community. Some good stuff in here. A lot of people in this survey actually did have the record books. They might not have had it with them, but they had them. But a small number, but significant numbers of times where community pharmacists are just raising a flag. Question, toxicity. We ought to take a look at this. Do we focus people on these kind of things? Not actively. Maybe we should. And a much bigger study, a bit more longitudinal, trying to put some of these things together to follow a patient over a period of time, add extra things in. The Community Pharmacy Future Project, sponsored by, supported by and led by the 4 largest multiple pharmacy businesses in this country. Significant improvements in adherence, in access and utilisation of rescue packs. These stats are from COPD patients. Reported improvements in quality of life, reduction in routine GP visits, and as a byproduct as well, a quit rate in smoking of around 1 in 7 of the people in the programme, and monetised as well. If we can do more of these things, there are benefits also to the system. But principally, taking more care, compassionately delivered, over a period of time, delivers real value. And I could go on. I could talk about the Pan-London flu vaccination service, from literally a standing start in 6 weeks to delivering 65,000 vaccinations in 2013-14. Over 100,000 in this year. Records here will know they'll have a much better feeling for me than the exact figure of where we are now. And an extended service too. Pharmacy will deliver set up right with a bit of investment in time and energy and resource, and my colleagues do that and are happy to do that and will continue to do that given the opportunity. And I've mentioned the NMS evaluation, which shows that works too. So we kind of know what those things look like, and we've also got some excellent principles to work with around medicines optimisation. Another great piece of work from the RPS, the principles of medicines optimisation. Lots of organisations signed up for these. I just draw your attention to the 2 things around the outside of these particular diagram, we've talked a bit about patient experience, the care that's involved in there, choice of medicines, sure, optimisation part of routine practice, making things safe. But the goal is improved outcomes, and we also need to measure and monitor the effectiveness of that. We need to know what's happening. We need to know how many. We need to know the outcome. We need an idea of the patient experience, and we need to put all those things together. So it would be very easy for me, I think, to stand here and have an argument about whether we should be focusing our energies on whether pharmacists should be cited in general practice or not, and probably they should. And I can completely understand why young pharmacists, much younger pharmacists than me, would really think that's a great opportunity. And boy, is there a lot to go at. So we can have an argument about that. Or we can say, what is important right now is how pharmacists as an integrated profession should collectively start to play to their individual strengths to solve some of these intractable problems around changing the environment, changing where the patient is at the time, across interfaces, across the admissions interface, across the discharge interface. There are pharmacists currently working, if we want to think about it like that, in 2 different sectors. Intractable problem discharge, making sure that things work more seamlessly across that divide. I remember doing a programme on it at the General Hospital, rest in peace, Nottingham, back in 1982-84. The General is no more. But we were worried very much about discharge patients from the medical wards with complicated regimes of medicines and what we might do about that. The high-risk patients I've mentioned, those with multiple morbidities. Lots of people might be involved in that. We've got some brilliant tertiary level consultant pharmacists with huge amounts of experience and skills that we should be tapping into. Some of them, I'm delighted to say, also now working with a wider remit in primary care. Brilliant resource. How do we connect some of that together? The high-risk medicines I've mentioned, so patients at high risk, medicines that are particularly integral to the very essence of them, high risk in themselves. But maybe there's something a bit simpler than that as well. I'd add my 4th strand to this. Maybe compassionate care would just begin to address those who've simply never had their medicines explained to them before. And as part of that, we might measure whether that helps things along or not. I rather suspect it will. So I'm going to come up and I'm going to finish with my practical suggestion. So I'm going back to urgent and emergency care. Up front, big issue, lots of people with lots of parts to play in this, and can we come up with a practical solution to engage community pharmacy in this, because everybody is talking about it. And you can go online right now and you can hear Simon Stevens talking about community pharmacy, you can hear Sir Bruce Keogh talking about community pharmacy's part to play here, and you can hear Keith Willett talking about community pharmacy and can we not make more use of them. So I agree with NHS England that better use of community pharmacists is part of a solution to the current challenges in A&E. I completely agree. And I would hope there isn't anybody in this room who would think otherwise. But services need to be easier to commission, and somehow we need to get to that holy grail, which we've talked about for a long time. We need to start to shift some of the money into different places across the system to make it work. This is not, in itself, a plea for more money overall. This is a plea to start thinking about where we apply some of the funding to deliver it better for our patients and the public. And ultimately, if we're going to make maximum use of some of the excellent campaigns that are currently being run to try and persuade people that there are different options to them than the door of A&E, if they can get into it past the flashing blue lights that are queued up outside, then we need to start thinking about how we improve the use of all the parties along the continuum to help this thing out. And here's a particular reflection on the scale of the problem. This is one of Keith Willett's slides. So at the moment, dispositions, you ring up NHS 111, 1 in 100 calls is likely to end up with the person on the end of it being told that they could very well be dealt with efficiently and effectively at a community pharmacy. And I've heard Keith say, and I think on the clip online you'll hear him say, That's nowhere near enough. If we're truly serious about making that work, that is nowhere near enough. And there are challenges in that to us, which we have to recognise and we have to face into. I think that if the NHS is really going to be sold on the idea of pointing people more efficiently, more effectively, more often at community pharmacy, they're going to want 5 things, at least 5 things. Here are my 5 things. When somebody arrives at the community pharmacy, it needs to be open. The directory of services has to work, and at the moment it doesn't, because we've argued for a long time whether we were ever going to, really home in on NHS choices as being where all the information would be. We are, good, that's a start. It needs to be open. They would like to know the person who is going to receive the individual coming through, who hopefully will have been told they're coming, knows what this is all about. They're going to want some kind of assurance. They're going to want a feel for what the interaction that the person is going to receive is going to be like. They're going to want to know whether it happened or not. How many people actually follow through on the advice being given by NHS 111? Surely we need to measure that. And ideally, they're going to want to know whether that resolved the issue, whether the patient, the member of the public, got the answer they wanted. And I think they also want a 6th thing, shouldn't they? Isn't that an opportunity to support the campaigns, to talk about where people go, to talk about how people access services, so that the next time they might be a little bit further down that line towards responsible and supported self-care than they were previously. I think they want all of those things. At the moment, I'm not sure how many of those we can deliver. The 5-year forward view, and Simon Stevens' take on this, is that he doesn't want 1,000 flowers to bloom, nor is he implementing a top-down single model. But as far as I'm concerned, and where my community pharmacy colleagues are concerned, there's a danger of that right now. So we've made a good start. You can get an emergency repeat medicine across London. There are many, many more Pharmacy First, a nicer title than minor ailment scheme. There are many more of those schemes up and running across the country as a result of this. There is some great work being done, I think at great speed, as fast as humanly possible, on trying to fix the NHS 111 piece, led by Anne Joshua, to try and fix some of that. So it's a great start, but if we don't do something else, it's going to be uncoordinated, it's going to continue to be patchy, and if the NHS genuinely and government genuinely want to tell people that pharmacy is a place to go, then we need to do a little bit better than that. If it's patchy and uncoordinated, we're not going to get shared learning. We're going to have little opportunity to build. And at the end of the day, local could fix things, but there are some things that really need a bit of a shove at a national level. And organisations like mine and others are here to help. So I'd like to suggest that what we need a programme to do this. We need a partnership between NHS England and community pharmacy organisations, and we need to build on the very best experience and the very best skills of our local champions, whether they're based in LPCs, whether they're running LPNs, if they've now worked out what those things are, and also that they recognise that we've got within the community pharmacy sector some great skills about implementing things, operational skills, technical skills, service development, pathway redesign skills that could all be tapped into. Many of those people who can fix this are here tonight. And I've been want to say, when I've been thinking about this, if we're really up for it, and boy, we're up for it, I could tell you right now, the 24 people I'd stick in a room to say, get on with it. Because you can do it. And I'm trying very hard not to look at one of them right now. Robbie, you know very well it's you, mate. 24 people to facilitate solutions, to take things through local testing, to collaborate, to lead, to scale up, while focusing, also working with national organisations on some of the really key solutions that need to be delivered. We need to fix some IT. We need to deliver real connectivity across the system. We need to make use of the SCR. We need to work that through. We need to work through it really quickly. Mohammed's busy tweeting away, trying to fix SCR even as we speak. But also we need to recognise that there are other things that have been done over the last few months and years which are absolutely part of this. The CPPE package on communication skills development in community pharmacy is part of this solution. If we were really truly serious about implementation, we'd work out exactly how that's going to help us. And we'd have a plan for doing it. The 5-year forward view even talks about recognising that change like this is hard work. We want professionals to do different things. We need to help them. It isn't going to be just a magic answer. And therefore, there is a recognition in the 5-year forward view, page 27, that this sort of transformation might be pump primed. So I am asking for some money, I think, to be put in to make this happen, to bring those 24 people or 30 people or however many people it is together to effect this change. So we can carry on chucking 700 million, where we chucked the last 700 million and the 500 million before that, or the 2 billion, or the whichever billion it is, or George Osborne's billion. We can carry on chucking that where we've always chucked it, or we could think, do you know what? There's a whole system here that needs a little bit of a help, and we can invest a little bit in the sector to facilitate some of that change and to bring those people together to make it happen. So if I had a single challenge to Simon Stevens, and he was here tonight, this will be it. Can the top of the NHS work with us? Because we're ready to work with them. And I'll finish really with just two sort of issues where I think will help this. Judith Smith's done 2 great reports for the RPS, Now or Never and Never Say Never Again. No, that was a Bond film, sorry. And each time Judith has posed the question, do you really want this? Now, I was involved in a small way in a little tweet chat going on last night, and I think the colleagues who were tweeting away absolutely are in that top box. I also think most of them are not in the bottom box. I think they're ready for change. So I think that, yes, we have to want it, but I don't think there's an alternative. We've got to front up, we've got to build on key examples, and however administratively challenging that might look. And finally, we need to stop waiting for permission. So before I conclude with my final sentence, I'm going to leave you with a slide which is, if anything, the most personal slide of all here. I'm going to leave you at the end with a list of the people who I really admire in pharmacy, or people who've helped me along the way at various points over the course of my career. Not all of the people whose names are going to be on the slide are pharmacists. But I think that often we don't necessarily reflect on people who we admire, people who we'd like to be like, and people who we need to follow. And I think there are plenty of pharmacy frontline champions out there that need some following, and they need a little bit of support. So I'm going to come to that in just a minute. I should also say before my final sentence that it also requires me, I think, to just thank one or two people in particular. So if you're not on the slide and you think you ought to be, that's because it's quite a big font and I didn't want it to run over the mural once. But I come here tonight supported by a fabulous team in the office, and they've kind of lived a little bit of this with me for the last probably too long. So I'd like to thank very much the Pharmacy Voice team, and particularly Kate, who did a fabulous job with the slides. So if you bump into somebody who looks like she might work with me a bit later on with Kate on her badge, she put all that together for me, and I'm very, very grateful. But for the team especially, we're a small team, we're a little gang. We sit in an office at the top of a building in Bloomsbury Square. It's all a little bit cosy, and we try and do things. We try to move things forward. So thank you very much to the team. And I should also say a special thank you to a couple of people in the room, representatives of my family, particularly my son who's here, who I hope he hasn't walked out. So I'd particularly like to thank Greg for coming, because that means a lot to me too. So my end point really is the Secretary of State thinks pharmacy has got something to offer. Andy Burnham does politicians across the political spectrum do. Simon Stevens does, Sir Bruce Keogh does, Keith Willett does, lots of people in this room do. We've just been doing some recruitment, and we just recruited a director of policy who's going to start with us in February. And I was talking to a board member, and I'm pleased to say that there's very few board members here tonight, so I can tell this story because nobody would be offended. A board member said to me, Rob, why would somebody like that want to come and work at Pharmacy Voice? And I said, well, obviously to work with me. But no, genuinely, without exception, I think the people we spoke to, and we had a lot of people apply, which we're very, very grateful, talked about, everywhere you go, people are talking about pharmacy. There's something in this profession, and it seems a really exciting thing and an exciting place. So I think the case is made. I think if you want to use a marketing term, lots of people have bought the sizzle. But we need to work differently as pharmacy, with pharmacy organisations, across pharmacy organisations, and with NHS England, hopefully, to deliver real meat in the sausage that creates the sizzle. If that's not too twee, I'm going to finish there. Thank you very much for your attention, and these are my professional heroes. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that sizzling prescription, Rob. And now we move on to the responding, the discussant side of it. We're very lucky. We've got Professor David Colin-Tomé, OBE. As you've noticed, everybody's got a gong tonight, apart from our lecturer. So, it's just the ways of the world. We've got Professor David Haslam, CBE, who's the chair of the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. So first of all, I'm going to ask David Colin-Tomé to come up and as our first discussant. David.
Thank you very much. Good evening, and first of all, Rob, congratulations on a tour de force. Comprehensive and challenging to all of us. Now, I'd like to throw in a few challenges myself, I suppose. First of all, it's refreshing to hear a service, community pharmacy, who doesn't seem to be complaining that patients want to see them, which is not the norm in our present NHS, it might be. However, I've also been involved in the Department of Health for years. I remember even in the early 90s when I got involved in those reforms, that they were promulgating the idea that community pharmacy could have a leading role. And we've had various iterations since, and yet we keep repeating the same messages. I was part of that advisory group, the Now or Never. And so when is it going to end, as it were, these promises for the future? It reminds me what Julian Tudor-Hart, the socialist GP, said about general practice, that they're always laying claim to ground they do not wish to occupy. And I think that's challenge number one. Second, Rob referred to the Francis inquiry, and I, with George Alberti, had the dubious pleasure of doing reports about Mid Staffordshire before even Robert got involved. And I remember being asked by the Secretary of State at that time, do you think this is a one-off? And I said, I know this is the wrong answer, but sadly I don't think it is. And in my years of being passionate about the public sector, I wonder at our very love of the NHS makes us defend the NHS as an institution rather than being concerned about the individual patients. So do we treat patients as grateful supplicants of this free care that we deign to give them, rather than actually seeing them as partners and with some say. One of the things I always found offensive was that public health model of wants, needs and resources, as if patients' wants are too least important to think of it as a need and therefore we need to defer resources to them. And so I think one thing is there a cultural issue in the health service? Even though individuals are very compassionate, as a system revert to defending the NHS rather than trying to give the service to the patients and what maybe their increasing needs. Third, and I'll just mention this briefly, I was the only one who actually supported Andrew Lansley's reforms, and because I think that if your primary and community services are going to be an alternative to hospital centricity, you needed commissioners who took primary care in its general terms seriously. And I've got to say that over the donkey's years I've been involved in healthcare, commissioners generally haven't, and have focused almost predominantly on hospital care. So there was a change needed. I also instantly think it's right that local authorities should be in charge of public health predominantly, because they have far more influence on the social determinants of health. But anyway, that's enough of that. But that's a challenge, as can clinicians be involved in commissioning? And I say, of course, they must be. And that the commissioning provider split has become too transactional and separate, when actually commissioning should be about enabling good provision, and that providers should be taking some of that leadership rather than waiting for commissioners to drive quality in. Fourth point about the resource, which you also referred to, Rob, was about, I know best about general practice, but given that government policy for donkey's years has been about more focus on community-based services, the fact is in general practice we have now got less of a percentage of the NHS money than ever before at a time when the demand on primary and community services has increased. And that is the policy focus away from hospitals, that a higher percentage of money is going to the hospital sector and has been for some years. Fifth point is the one advantage that general practice might have, which we don't necessarily utilise, is that we have a formal population responsibility. And I think all NHS organisations should take on a population responsibility if we're going to look at the needs of a community as well as the individual patient. Now, I know we don't discharge that well, and often it's a way of GPs getting paid how many patients are registered with us. But it's the opportunity. And also, when I was involved in that models of pharmacy, it strikes me that if pharmacy is going to lay claim to the grounds it wants to occupy, there maybe needs to be some sort of vehicle to get them engaged. Now, I know many people might dispute it, but to me, one of the big breakthroughs in general practice was the development of fund holding. And without a population, how could you have a budget? But the great joy of fund holding was, for the first time, practices began to look at the needs of their patients beyond necessarily their immediate practice. And one of the biggest successes of fund holding was anti-fund holding. And I know some colleagues in the room, friends of mine, were passionately anti-fund holding, but to me it got GPs off their backsides and got involved far more in some of the policy development that's necessary that clinicians need to be involved, especially those in community-based services. It's the population that has actually been useful for a budget. It's the population that makes things like long-term conditions quite relevant in general practice, because you can search for the undiagnosed and make certain review takes place because you have a population responsibility. And in pharmacy, we need to work closer together with on these issues. Had that same population responsibility would make the deal so much easier, it strikes me, as a future. It's also because of the registered population that Mr. Lansley gave a general practice a leadership role in the new commissioning. But it's a message for all of us, and including our hospital colleagues. They need to start taking a proactive view of the needs of our population as well as that patient in front of you. It's not either or, it's both, it strikes me. The next final, getting near some of my final issues, is we had a press conference this morning, and one of the journalists asked me, well, do GPs not get on with their community pharmacies? And I said, well, in all my limited knowledge, we get on quite well, but not in any systematic way of working together. And it is possible, isn't it, that the generous production of pharmacists that various universities have developed, and the shortage of general practice, both in recruitment and people wanting to be GPs and so on, and similar bit nursing, that pharmacists might be that, as it were, facilitator of relationships, not just working within general practice, but also working with our colleagues in community pharmacy. It's really weird that I've visited practices recently who have a community pharmacy attached to them or in their grounds, same grounds, and yet work with a different pharmacist. And I think that's quite bizarre, but it is possible that the need for pharmacists as an essential part of a primary care team, because general practice is far beyond just GPs nowadays, just as a by the way, a third of all the consultations that general practice are attributed to are done by nursing staff. It's clear that there's an opportunity to work together, and maybe that's the entree we need to bring these two actually disparate factions together to work in a much more coherent way. But in the two other final points I want to make is there has been a growth of these new GP organisations, federations, networks, so on and so forth. I prefer the federation model because it's bottom up. And if you want to get a whole lot of individualists working together, at least if they own it, there's more likely to be commitment rather than something imposed on them. And therefore, I'm very keen. And the real test is, rather than being a GP focus, how can it be a primary care opportunity? Now, I boringly wrote a paper a few years ago called The Primary Care Home. It's a take on the American obsession with the medical home, and they've been trying to get integration for years. And I said, we've got that already. It's list-based general practice. What I would envisage is an organisation that has a population responsibility but involves all of us as workers rather than on the general practice. And that isn't a takeover. There's quite opportunity for autonomy within that sort of organisation and working coherently together around a population and hopefully even a budget that might be a chance for us to make or buy services. That seems to be an opportunity. So where is community pharmacy now? Around a federation model. Now, it would be, of course, the easy answer, you should join GP federations, but maybe, see, in our pressure of time that everything's got to be done in 6 months, all the successful organisations, certainly in healthcare internationally, have taken years to develop. And within the pressures that we're under, we sometimes don't realise that needs building up. And it may be that one opportunity is community pharmacists may want to have their own federations and begin to work as part of a developmental process. I don't care. I only just want people to get involved in whatever they feel comfortable, but not by staying in separate organisations with fighting our bygone battles. And it just leaves me a final point that one of my favourite Disraeli quotes, and if we're going to get rid of some of our sovereignty and our individualism, rather than for the common good, Disraeli said that apart from seizing an opportunity, the best thing in life is when to know how to forgo an advantage. And if we could learn some of those as part of the cultural shift, as well as having a realisation that the patient is much more important than our sometimes preciousness about the NHS, then we can really maybe do something about care, compassion and community pharmacy working in a much more coherent way with the rest of us. Thank you very much.
David. Thank you very much, David. We've had some very frank talking tonight, and I expect no less from David Haslam. David.
Thank you very much indeed. Absolutely delighted to be here. What a distinguished audience. Can I stress that not a word I'm saying now is official NICE policy or policy of any other organisation that I've ever been involved in. Indeed, let's say it's probably going to be completely evidence-free as well, which is quite ironic. When I was asked to respond to the lecture, my response is very straightforward and very brief. Wow. That was tremendous, great lecture, and particularly I'm really delighted you used the words care and compassion because they are absolutely central to everything that we should be trying to achieve now. I think we're in a really, really interesting time where we're getting greater focus on patient-centeredness. Now, patient-centeredness has been so much waffle over many years. It appears in mission statements without actually having any reality. But I think with the power shift that the availability of information on the internet has made, opening up much more information to anyone who has a computer or a smartphone changes the power balances within health and social care. And so we're into a different position where patient-centeredness becomes real, where focusing on what patients want, need, expect, and so on, all David's words were absolutely spot on, are critical and ally that with the best evidence. So what bugs me is that I was chair of the RCGP in 2001, and Maureen Baker, current chair of the RCGP, was my honorary secretary, and she and I spent our time going and meeting pharmacy and saying, how do we expand the role of pharmacy, bring it much more into the central role that we know it should have. We were both absolutely, I've been committed for years that most pharmacists are really, I'm on dangerous ground, but I'm going to say overtrained for most of the work that they do. And so that training is wasted when they have so much professional skill and ability. And I learnt this in I spent my time as a GP, and I remember many years ago, it was probably a PCT, or it could have been an FHSA. It was one of those acronymed organisations, paid for local pharmacists to come and join general practices for evening educational meetings. And I know my practice, we had the pharmacist from our local Tesco arrived, and we all rather paternalistically sort of thought this was going to be a waste of time. Wow, it was not. The information, the education, the support, the teamwork, the development we had through working with pharmacists was really quite something. What happened? Nothing. We're not working together. We're not engaged together. And for me, and I can't stop behaving as a doctor, I want to know what the diagnosis is. Why is it that we all talk the talk about working together and nothing shifts? Part of it alludes to your final cartoon, Rob, which can be summed up, that wonderful phrase, I'm all for progress, it's change I can't stand. Part of it, you have to understand, I mean, having been a leader of general practice, I was always very struck, and said this at the time, that GPs complain constantly and correctly about being far too busy, but are hugely reluctant to let anybody else take any of that work. And you have to try and understand what that's about. And part of it is driven by a genuine altruism of of believing that they are doing the best for their patients, but actually not recognizing that other people do bring this remarkable skill. And we then have to try and unpick why what is it that stops that happening? And a lot of GP groups I talk to say, well, people go to the pharmacist, they always get sold something. And that's a problem for GPs. And I fundamentally have felt for years that we should be able to fund pharmacists not to sell something, to have a patient come in and, interesting use of the word patient, isn't it? I've just realised, a person come in and say, I've got this problem, and the pharmacist to listen, to be sympathetic, to be helpful, to be caring, to be compassionate, and to say you don't need anything. And I just don't know how often that happens. And if you could demonstrate that happens a lot, that would be fantastically beneficial to breaking down the mistrust between general practice and pharmacy, which I just need to understand where this block is. This is an audience full of folks who might have an answer to this, so I'm not going to say much more. I think if we can get the answer right to working together, the benefits are really quite remarkable. There's plenty of work out there. David's wonderful comment about a sector of the health and social care system that doesn't complain about having work, in fact, the very opposite. I mean, what an absurd situation to be in. So if in our discussion, I'd love to understand why we've been talking about this for so long. We all agree, and I'd hate to come back to a lecture here in 10 years where we discuss the real potential benefits of pharmacy. So then, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And I say here's your last point in particular. We certainly don't want to come back to exactly the same sort of Groundhog Day again on that. And we've got the makings of an extremely powerful discussion, but sadly, we've got about a quarter of an hour to get observations and questions from the audience. So please do step up and give us your views or ask a question. I'm going to be very unfair because I was very taken by the overtraining point that David made, and I know that Zara Jalil, who is postgrad from the UCL School of Pharmacy, would like to ask a question about the future for young pharmacists. So if you're around, Zara, you might want to ask your question.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank everyone for this lovely, very informative talk, and it's really intriguing, really, in the role of pharmacy. So basically, I'm a PhD student, and Professor David Taylor is my second supervisor. Professor Felicity Smith is my first supervisor. And basically, we conducted a project at UCL where we aimed to improve adherence for patients that were discharged from hospital after a heart attack. And successfully, we managed to improve adherence, although our sample size was quite small. Therefore, we are undertaking a larger trial, a multi-center trial, hopefully, to see if we can achieve successful results, again, on adherence and clinical outcomes in patients discharged from hospital. So my question is, any advice for designing services in community pharmacy that link hospital and community, that is to say, link primary and secondary care? Thank you.
I think that's very much up your street, Rob, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't want to, and I don't want. I was talking long enough. I don't want to occupy too much time. I think, yeah, it can be done. I mean, Duncan McRobbie's here, and Duncan, you and I were in a group talking about this. Oh, goodness knows how many years ago. I think you have to just begin with a bit of will. You know, I think there are some. I was very much thinking about how you link the sort of pharmacists that support people in hospital who've had an MI, and recognising that the turnaround time in our hospitals these days is very, very short. People are landing back in the community very quickly, and how do we pick them up when the follow-up appointment may be a purely kind of medical one, and medicines are really important. So, you know, how do we get to a point where we have a follow-up that's meaningful and all the rest of it? I think you can commission it. I don't think we've even started to think about the lever that is commissioning. If that's the right thing to do, then how do we think about it? How do we commission it? And then when you start to think, oh, we're going to commission this, then there are people around who'll say, well, okay, let's think about how we might deliver that against a specific brief. So commissioning is a fabulous lever. David talked about some of the benefits out of the reforms, and I completely would agree with him that the public health one is a really important one. And we were just getting somewhere with pharmacy before the reforms. That was really my point. We then had a period of, but I think you commission it.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, lady over here. I think we'll take two or three. I can see lady over here. I can see Nick, one of these Pantheon up on the screen before. And I think if we've got a third one over here, that would be good. Yes, I can see a third one there. Perfect.
Hi, Rob. I'm Gulroot. I'm I lead on public health policy for pharmacy at the department, and I'm also the lead pharmacist for the Health and Wellbeing Directorate at Public Health England. Rob, some amazing stuff about how pharmacy can contribute to medicines optimization and adherence, etc. Just would be great to hear your view on how pharmacy can engage in the prevention agenda. Simon Stevens has talked about the importance of prevention, but also the Public Health England document, Evidence into Action, has identified 7 priorities. And my personal view is that pharmacy can contribute to all 7 of those priority areas. So how do we see pharmacy really, really engaging at scale, at pace, but with real, consistency across the country?
Great question. Nick Barber, Professor.
Thanks very much. Nick Barber from the Health Foundation, and we're an organisation, a charity dedicated to improving the quality of healthcare. And we do quite a lot of work trying to spread innovation and so on. And one of the big problems which people tell us about is what we could loosely call headspace. It's having the time to think through in this. Everybody's feeling so oppressed, they're feeling so knackered at the end of the day that really it's quite hard to get them together. And I think the key to getting the pharmacists and the GPs together more in the community, we can go back to the early days of clinical pharmacy in hospitals in the 80s, where it was actually the success was that the pharmacist said to the doctors, how can we help you? And the doctors said this would be really useful, and they trained them in the stuff which really suited them. So I think there'd be a lot more trust if the local GPs were training the pharmacists in how to look in ears, how to decide when to refer on to the GP or to A&E, and there was a shared understanding of that. But for that to happen, I think there really has to be some headspace and some funding to get local communities together.
Thank you, Nick. And then third.
My name is Stuart McConaughey. I would like to continue Dr. Haslam's analogy because there's one vital part missing. He made the comment that the GP, in a sense, mistrusts the community pharmacist because they want to sell something. Go back to the analogy, Dr. Haslam. The patient, as you described, goes into the pharmacy and he seeks advice, help, guidance, etc. Quite simply, how is that reimbursed as far as the pharmacist is concerned?
Great. Well, I think, first of all, I'll ask David Conin-Tome to talk about prevention, and then I may talk about collaboration with this David and with Rob. David, if you'd like just to talk about the public health aspect, which I think has been very much, something that you've concentrated on over the years.
That's true, but we've tended to reduce it into obsession about smoking, exercise and alcohol and telling people what to do. And one of the issues for us in this partnership with patients and community is how do we meet some of their needs and how do we have a much more asset-based approach of finding out what the needs of a community are, what talents they have. But at the moment we have a very professional approach of telling people you shouldn't drink, you shouldn't smoke, and you should exercise, and we call that a dialogue. And I think we just need to shift how we work with our patients and our community into a far more partnership approach rather than this exhortation and telling off is number one.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be obsessed with this, but having a community orientation, population, whatever you want to call it, does make that easier rather than actually a sporadic thing. Of course, individual advice is important, and that public health isn't only about population, it's also about there's an important public health component of an individual consultation. That's important. But I do think part of this is attitudinal about our relationship. And like I said, that wants, needs, resources thing that public health used to tell us out trivialises the importance of what patients and public are telling you about what they could do with. And I think that's an important thing. So it's behaviour and partnership is going to get some of those changes, and relationships. So for instance, if you look at early and quick interventions, general practice often does quite well on some of those because of that ongoing relationship with the person in front of you rather than it being a strange person. So build on the strengths of what pharmacists and GPs do already in their relationships, but have a much more proactive approach to the needs of a community rather than just getting obsessed with this telling off model seems to be a way forward. Just on that point, when I talked about these federations and these bigger organisations, what I don't want is to be a factory model of primary care. These are organisations that actually support and work with individual local general practice, and that would be true of pharmacy. How can it be little and big at the same time is an important factor.
I'll come to you in a minute, Rob. But David, would you like to respond first at this point? Can you have a shared understanding without the right incentives?
I totally get the point. What I'm trying to explore is where the blocks are. Why is the distrust between, if that is part of the problem? And all I can say is that when I've talked to groups of GPs, this has occasionally been flagged up. Now, if that's the problem, there's a pretty cheap, and if we can see, and Rob's lecture has demonstrated, the phenomenal potential fiscal as well as health benefits from a greater engagement of pharmacy, then it sounds pretty cheap sort of step forwards to fund the ability to address that particular issue. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I'm not expecting people to work for nothing. I'm just saying if that's the problem, then let's try and look at the solution. So much of the rest of the discussion, it keeps striking me that we're stuck with the structures that were set up in 1948 for all sorts of interesting contractual reasons, the separation of primary and secondary care, the different sort of employment structures, the way that hospital pharmacy worked within part of a team, general practice and primary care pharmacy worked completely separately. Heaven's sake, 1948, that's an awful long time ago. It's time to be, and as David says, exploring new ways of working together, breaking down the mistrust, recognizing completely the skills are synergistic, that they are absolutely joined together to produce something better for the patients. And I'm certain we can do that.
Thank you, David. Rob.
Yeah, three great questions. I'll try and do justice to all three of them. I mean, there is distrust, but I think it's starting to break down. I'll just give you one example. I think that some of the, if any of you are familiar with the PM Challenge Fund pilot programme, down in East Sussex, led by Jonathan Sargent, who I think is a GP in Hove. 18 GP practices, I think 19 community pharmacies involved in it. Pharmacy at the heart of some of the activity there. I was reflecting earlier when David and I were talking about this after the thing this morning. I heard a presentation, I think, at an RPS event from a GP who's involved in that particular work down there. And the point was made that in one or two of the practices, there was a concern about working with a local community pharmacist. Didn't really get on, didn't really know each other, didn't really know what each other did. So what they're currently doing is they've brought the community pharmacist into the practice so that they can get to know each other, they can get to recognise each other's skills with the full intention that when all that's sorted, they're going to go back and deliver the same kind of services back out in the community pharmacy. I think some of these things are going. I think if you look at those kind of examples, those things are breaking down. I do think there is some merit in what David said about population approaches and maybe shared measures across professions in terms of outcomes. I mean, we have it's almost like a running war, it seems to be, in some parts of the country around flu vaccinations. Pharmacists are stealing our patients. Pharmacists are, scooping up all the vaccine. I've heard all of that. We still haven't hit the target set by the chief medical officers, so we can't be nicking anybody's patients. Maybe together we can get to the target and share the benefit out of that. I think Nick's point is really important. Everyone is busy. I'm not pretending at the moment. It's very nice to say we don't appear to be here saying we don't want any people to come to us. I think we've got as much of a delegation challenge as anybody else, really, in thinking about how we use the team. But again, there we've got an answer. I didn't talk too much about public health tonight. I went on too long as it was. But some of the, we really need to make a decision about whether we're going to pursue the healthy living pharmacy model. And both Mike and Deborah are here tonight who've been very much at the heart of that development. Not just about the pharmacist, about the whole team delivering services to people, how those things to come together. I think there are some really good simple examples of joint work. Again, I was talking to an optical colleague about just how they wandered along the street and said to the community pharmacist, "Red eyes, how should we deal with that between us?" That's enthusiasm. That's that's a little bit of why don't we do something different? A little bit of imagination. You can only go so far with some of those things. Maybe we need to put something meaningful around that. Some while ago, I did some work across Europe in various places. One of the places I pitched up on occasions was Holland. They had a system going back 10 years ago called quality circles. Community pharmacies had to produce a kwaliteitsjaarplan, which those of you who don't speak Dutch, amazingly enough, means quality year plan. So maybe there's something around actually we talk a lot about aligning the contractual framework. Maybe we could start by aligning it, by giving people a little bit of room just to get together occasionally and talk about it. And I think there is a point about the mistrust issue about selling stuff. The first person on my list was Barry Andrews. I went to work for Barry Andrews in 1995. Barry was the managing director of Moss Chemists, as it was then, a lovely man. Managing director at 29 years of age, grew the business to quite a significant number, 700 shops, I think, in the end, before he retired. Barry had a sort of mantra, which is profits through people. If we feel collectively as a business that we don't sell something, we don't. And there was a bit of work done in Moss while I was there, and I worked for Moss between 1995 and 2000. And I think it would be well worth having another look at doing it again, replicating it. We found that on 25% of occasions when people came in and asked for advice, they weren't sold anything. Hasn't been done, though, for 10 or 15 years. Perhaps you should do it again.
Thank you, Rob. And did you want one?
Just on that point, maybe the reason that they're not complaining about patients coming to them is because they have that consumer focus. The trouble is the rest of the health service will get paid even if nobody comes to see us. So it's not all bad, that idea. I'm not advocating flogging stuff to patients willy-nilly, but it does create a different cultural approach, whereas the rest of us seem to want patients not to come to us.
On that note, you've hit a chord there, and it's really sad, but we have just about come to the end of this evening's formal business. There are so many people in the audience who I would love to provoke into various questions or observations, not least on the front row here. Our new president of the Royal Society, Royal Pharmaceutical Society, amongst others. But I'm now going to call upon Gopal Mitra, MBE, who has only just recently stepped down as the Director of Health Policy and Public Affairs at the PAGB. Mitra.
So I've been given the honour of thanking our speakers, our lecturer Rob, and our responders on behalf of all of you. Now, I bet that was a surprise. So, on behalf of all of you, I'd like to say, Rob, thank you so much. That was really mind-blowing in a way that only you can do. And it did set me to think about where we have come from in the world of pharmacy. And I've been watching this from PAGB for many, many years, more than I care to mention. And I had always thought that pharmacy was at the centre of the universe. And a lot of you that know me know that I have certainly come from that perspective. The reason I thought that pharmacy was at the centre of the universe was because you're there. You're there, you're on the high street, you're accessible. If I want to just pick up anything from a pharmacy and ask for a bit of advice, I can do. But I got really quite disappointed in all the tensions that were going on between the professions. Now, one thing that, sorry, I'm just going to digress for 1 second on your behalf, Tim forgot to mention that having retired from PAGB, I am now actually working my way towards becoming a professional lay representative, patient representative. So I'm Vice Chair of Men's Health Forum, along with John Chisholm, who's our Chair. I've just been appointed as trustee of the National Association of Patient Participation, and I am on the RCGP's Patient and Carers Partnership Group. So on behalf of those organisations, I just want to say that pharmacy for all of us is a really crucial place for our health, not for our sickness. We tend to go to the doctor for our sickness, but we are going to the pharmacy for things that are not just about sickness. Yes, we go in there for our prescriptions, but I have to say that there's an environment for conversations around well-being. So the issue around prevention, I think, is a crucial one. I know you didn't have time really to go into that, but prevention and the opportunities for prevention in pharmacy must be absolutely enormous, and we need to take that on board. On behalf of Men's Health Forum, I just want to say that you could do better. We have done a lot of work with the Royal Pharmaceutical Society, and Helen Gordon, you're here and you remember that work. But it's all about where are the spanners, I think was the report of the Men's Health Forum. It's when you walk into a pharmacy, it's not really particularly conducive to men. So there's something that I think that pharmacy could pick up the challenge for. And again, on your behalf, you all know that Sir Derek Wanless did the fully engaged scenario in his planning of the securing of future health. The 5-year forward view to me looks like the Wanless review revisited, the fully engaged scenario actually put into some new or brought up to date in terms of policy. Now, in terms of fully engaged, that scenario was not just about engaging the public, the population, but it was also about engaging healthcare professionals. And overall this time, the engagement of healthcare professionals with people, the engagement of healthcare professionals with each other is something that I think we have been missing. And you said that we don't want to be here in 10 years' time talking about the potential of pharmacy. Well, from my perspective, we've already been here for 30 years talking about the potential for pharmacy, because the first potential for pharmacy report was the Nuffield report of 1985. I think some of you in the room probably remember that. So, no, we don't want to be here in, well, I may not be here in 10 years' time in spirit, to be talking about the potential for pharmacy. But I can't leave the stage, because a lot of you know me as being the champion for self-care for all these years. I can't leave the stage before saying that pharmacy and self-care go hand in hand. So if we're going to make pharmacy work, we make self-care work. And that's got to be a major step forward for us all. So on behalf of the guests, thank you particularly to UCL School of Pharmacy for a fantastic event. Thank you, David, for putting on this and organising this event, along with your team and Sarah in particular. And I think thank you for asking me to do this. So on your behalf, thank you all.
And Gopa, thank you very much indeed. Very elegantly done. You nearly sparked a whole new debate for the next 2 hours. But we're just managing to avoid that. To your thanks, I would simply like to add our thanks to Pfizer and to Deborah Montague, who is Pfizer's Pharmacy Development Lead, for her support and her what David describes as her careful stewardship of the company's relationship with the UCL School of Pharmacy. So thank you very much, Deborah. Thank you all for coming. And I believe that when those doors are thrown back, there will be a drink at the back. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you.